Welcome back to SEEK Bytes. Today we are going to be talking to Jarrod Hope. I am Elliot Miller and I'm joined by William Luck. And today with Jarrod, we're going to be talking about a lot of different things. Why does SEEK do open source? What good front ends are? What are some of the common mistakes? Webpack, yay or nay? Stick around for more. All right, so welcome back to SEEK Bytes for another episode. We have a special guest on today. So we're going to be talking to Jarrod Hope, who is the engineering manager for Frontend Practices at SEEK. Welcome, Jarrod. I'm also joined today by William Luck.
Yeah, I'm here again. It's the same voice. You already know me. Jarrod, who are you? What do you do here?
Hi, I'm Jahred. I'm the engineering manager for Frontend Practices at SEEK. So I do a lot of work about how SEEK does front end, specifically web, and just sort of looking at trying to sort of find those common problems and create generic solutions, designing tools and platforms to make SEEK create great websites.
Cool. So Frontend Practices, what do they do?
We sort of broadly look at front end, as I say. So we think that the best way to enable engineers to follow good practices is to build the tools that enable those practices. Our sort of flagship products are our design system, Braid design system, and our UI toolkit SKU, which are both open source solutions that we use to sort of embed SEEK opinions in by default, while still allowing engineers to build and do what they do best in the product teams that use them.
You said open source, so why open source?
There's a lot of reasons why we choose to build in the open when we can. We can't always, but when we can, one of the main reasons, the thing that's sort of closest to my heart in doing open source is that I think it sort of allows us to really keep our bar high for quality, making sure that the thing that we're building is not just good for SEEK today, but it allows us to think about how it might be used outside of SEEK. And that's particularly valuable because SEEK's going to be different in a year. It's going to be different in 5 years. So when I think about making sure that the things we're building works outside of SEEK, I'm also thinking about making sure it works for SEEK in 5 years when it's changed and different. And so it sort of allows us to think about our products as sort of how it gets used outside of our current use cases, our current needs.
Because we open source things that are made for SEEK, where's that balance between external people not working at SEEK saying, hey, can you add this feature into SKU, which is additional features that we might not need? How do you balance that?
Yeah, it's a great question. We're kind of protected a little bit from that because we have a bit of a division in our open source solutions. We have the ones like Playroom that are intended to be used outside of SEEK and actually have a lot of adoption and use outside of SEEK. And then we have things like SKU, where it's really more there for reference. It's there so that people could, in theory, copy and use the things in SKU. But unless you're building a SEEK UI, you're probably not going to be using SKU. It's built around too many opinions specific to SEEK. Because of that, we don't have people asking for features in SKU that aren't people working at SEEK. And if they're working at SEEK, we probably care about sort of supporting their use case. Whereas something like Playroom, the products are a little bit more scoped, they're a little bit clearer, so there's a less of a need to jump around and do things that we wouldn't also want to support.
For anyone listening who doesn't know SKU, Playroom, like for us it's like everyday language, like the letters of the alphabet. Can you explain what those products are, just briefly?
Yes, SKU is our sort of SEEK UI toolkit. It is broadly, it's a wrapper around Webpack, but also a wrapper around Jest and linting. It allows you to sort of run that sort of a bit of a meta framework that a product team will use to build their own web applications. So at SEEK, we use sort of a micro front ends approach where every team is sort of operating their own front end, but they're using SKU to sort of do the common things the same, mostly around how do you bundle and build, bit of linting, preview behaviors, those kinds of things.
So is SKU kind of like Create React App?
Yeah, though it existed before Create React App. Yeah, it's a meta framework, kind of similar, I guess, more to maybe a company-specific version of something like Next.js.
People always say, why don't we just use Next.js? What's your argument to those people who say that, or for any companies who have internal tools and say, why don't we just use one that's already on the market?
There's a couple of reasons why we wouldn't use a technology in general. Next.js, though, there's no reason we couldn't use it. Its chances are we would probably wrap it just to really embed some of those SEEK opinions and defaults, just to make sure that we can kind of have that entry point to say, this is the right decision for every application at SEEK. We have over 80 applications registered on our core websites today. So we don't necessarily want to sort of have, we just need to configure this one thing in Next.js. We probably want to have a wrapper so that we can do that for every team.
Yeah, that's a lot. 80. So is that 80 front ends, 80 micro front ends?
It's not 80 front ends. It depends on where you're sort of grouping which thing. We've got 50 SKU applications are registered on our production sites, but we have 80 in total. So some of those will be internal tools and other things. We also have 86 SKU applications currently on our GitHub org. Over 80 registered applications, but that includes APIs on our core domain sites, and then 50 specifically on our production sites of UI applications.
Wow, that is a lot.
Must be a pain for pushing updates out to 80 different repo, particularly like major ones and breaking changes. Like it feels like an effort.
Yeah, look, it absolutely is an effort, but it's also something we've been doing for a long time as a company, and it helps that teams work really well together. Yeah, you've got to push out an update, but you push out an update and teams update because they want those improvements. I think we learnt very early on that as we started breaking up our UI, the thing that makes it easy is being collaborative teams that want to consume and work and support and help each other. So it could be harder than it is now. And I think we've got a lot of years getting really good at these kind of micro front ends approaches. We've got a lot of solutions around it. For example, we have a solution called Metropolis that allows product teams to publish their own React components that get shared and used in other applications that all share a common dependency on our design system. So we can uplift the design system in one place across all of our shared UI. Every team then needs to update their own application, but we've just kind of all agreed this is a nice, easy way for us to minimize the cost of upgrading. So yeah, it's an effort, but also other solutions would have different problems, and we've solved the problems we have really well.
And one of the other design systems you mentioned, you mentioned Braid. So for those who aren't familiar with Braid, what is Braid?
Yeah, Braid is SEEK's design system. The solution is primarily expressed through a set of React components, but it's also a language as well. And when I say a language, if you've ever heard a designer speak, they might say, I want a bit of space. I want just a small space between the image and the text here, and sort of, add a sort of a normal gutter over here. Those terms they're using, space and put these sort of stack them up, and all of those terms, those are what we would call a language. And we've sort of transposed that language into a set of React components so that you can develop your applications using the same language as designers. Those designers have a space scale that they're working with. That scale is implemented in the components that you use. And so if you wanted to stack components up, you simply say, I want the space to be small, medium, large. And those, as close as possible, should match the terms the designers are using.
So it's really doing a lot of, by the sounds, a lot of the heavy lifting so that you don't have each team trying to recreate a table, trying to recreate a Flexbox grid. It just, out of the box, everyone has the same understanding, the same language for how they define their front ends, yeah?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I find it super useful using things like Braid and even Playroom Playroom's is a way to prototype without having to kind of build an app yourself. But I find I'm a bit of a walnut now when I try and write CSS because so much of these frameworks now do that heavy lifting for you. And there's some very cool things. I remember CSS Gap just recently came out, and there was a big update for that. But I feel so far removed from the things that are happening in the front end because teams like Frontend Practices are building tools that means we don't have to worry about it. I think it's really nice, particularly for people who, we have teams that aren't front end focused, who have a lot of back end people, and it makes that job easy. But then personally, I'm like, I kind of wish I was on some of those things as well. I wish I knew what was going on in the front end world as well. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, it's a very real problem that as you start scaling up sort of centralized investment in platforms, you can actually abstract away some of the things that engineers like working with. We don't want to abstract away working with CSS for the things where engineers are writing their own CSS and they have a reason and a need to write their own bespoke styling. And so teams can still do that. And it's just that we've kind of reduced how common that is, which has the problem that engineers are getting less need to write CSS. The way I think about it is we want to reduce the floor, the base level requirement for you to come into a team and be a productive member of that team. So you don't necessarily need to know CSS because those design systems are going to mean that you're not writing it all the time, but you still have the opportunity to excel. Great skills in front end are going to mean that you can build UI faster, better, quicker, cleaner. So it's definitely about you don't have to be necessarily a CSS expert to build SEEK UI, but we also want to allow that flexibility.
So when it comes to UI, comparatively, right, backend, there are a lot of patterns and practices for how to write good backends. You've got things like Uncle Bob's clean architecture and whatnot. When it comes to front ends, it seems like front ends are quite hard to write, especially good front ends. So it's kind of a big question, but why are good front ends so hard to make?
It's really hard to think about what the answer to that is without sort of going down a bit of a cascade of root cause analysis and go down and say, maybe it's because we just do a lot now. Our web applications are way more complicated than the original idea of I want to have this university study that I've published as some HTML and wouldn't it be nice if I could style this up a little bit. What we build today with web applications is so far beyond where we were really only a couple of decades ago. And so we do a lot with web UIs. We ask a lot from our web UIs. We want them to be accessible. We want them to load fast. So I think it's worth remembering that it's not hard because we're solving simple problems in complex ways. It's because we're solving really complex problems, and that has a lot of pros. But yeah, it does mean that we're often having to do a lot of things ourselves. And we're still, I guess, forming and storming the technologies that we use. React is quite stable now. It's been popular for a while. But even then, people are looking at how we write React, and that's constantly changing. Some of the recent innovations in React, thinking of the React compiler, something I'm quite excited about, is we're challenging even how we compile this work together, and we're trying to make it easier, yes, but it's always changing.
So it sounds like comparatively front end is quite bleeding edge. I mean, JavaScript is obviously very, very common, which is what, React transpiles down to at the end of the day.
Just on that hard to write thing, do you think that's partly to do with the language itself? Because JavaScript has evolved to what it is now. Now we have TypeScript, but it was a little bit more loose than, say, some of the other back-end languages.
I don't know. It's been a long time since I've been learning JavaScript. I learnt it a while ago, and I'm very comfortable with it now. So my perception of JavaScript is it has some quirky features. There's things that I wish it had and things that I would like, but they all kind of disappear when I'm just writing code. And there's no other language that I would reach for to just solve problems. When I want to write a simple script to modify some files or make some more changes, I'm not reaching for anything other than JavaScript, and I really enjoy it. So it might be the case. It's just very hard for me to imagine that, given how it just disappears. All of the problems with JavaScript disappear for me, and I can just express what I want and achieve what I want really easily.
Why have we chosen React, and why do we kind of continue to choose React as opposed to something else?
Yeah, I think those are two very separate but still really great questions. Why did we choose React? And why do we continue to use React? We chose React a long time ago when we were in a bit of a .NET shop at the time. We were using Razor to render out our front ends, and we wanted to create a server-rendered solution a solution that would allow us to build UI that had a rich front end but started server-rendered. And this was a long time ago. It was over 8 years ago when we were starting to sort of build out these UIs. Actually, it would have been more than 10 years ago now. The ability for React to server render and then hydrate on the client, create rich experiences on the client, but write the same language, server and client, was unparalleled. It was a really powerful solution and allowed us to do something we couldn't otherwise do. The things we were looking for, React was an easy win. That then proliferated throughout the company and we became a bit of a React shop. Everything's React. Now we have our design system uses React. So if we wanted to use a new framework, we'd need a new design system. The Metropolis repository I mentioned before, that would need to be rebuilt. There's so many things that would need to be rebuilt. Why do we continue to use React? Largely, I think because it's so stable. It's easy to hire React engineers, but also I just still think it's an incredibly good choice for a company that's really looking to emphasize composition, that's looking for sort of predictability, that's looking for being able to go anywhere, whether it's server or client, and just have an amazing ecosystem of componentry, of documentation. It's just really mature and quite a safe bet long term as well. Like, React's not going anywhere, and we're all very comfortable building in it.
You said it's easier to hire in React. Is it too easy to hire in React? I feel like so many people just learn React because they know that there's so many jobs on the market for it. Do you find that you just get candidates who just clearly don't really know what they're doing? Just say they have it on their resume?
But I actually think that's okay, that I don't want to necessarily have to hire only specialists who have spent 5 years studying their PhD in some specialist language. I want someone to be a generalist engineer who understands code, understands good design principles, but maybe not the specific technologies that we have and the design systems we have. I want them to be able to spin up and in a team and start being valuable and contributing value to our users as soon as possible. So maybe it is a very generalist language, but I kind of want that. I want that low bar of entry. Ultimately, there's a lot of people who can provide value to our users, and that's kind of our goal, is to allow people of all skills and all backgrounds to be able to build amazing UI.
I think with the design systems that we have in place, that really does tend to happen. If somebody's familiar with JavaScript and HTML, they may never have used React before, but it's not a huge leap to go from HTML and JavaScript or even PHP and HTML to then React, I think, especially if you've got things like SKU and Braid doing a lot of the heavy lifting. So if you're running on SKU, you don't have to think about Webpack. Now, I remember like running raw Webpack kind of thing, right? As opposed to using something like Create React App or SKU, and knowing the inner workings of Webpack or trying to figure that out is a real headache, right? You get some funky stuff in there. Webpack's very, very powerful, but if you don't know how to use it, it's
becoming obsolete a little bit though, isn't it? There's so many tools replacing Webpack at the moment because it's just complicated.
It is very complicated.
And things are a lot faster for building.
It's certainly come a long way.
Jahred seems unsure about that.
I have a lot of fondness for Webpack. It really has solved a lot of problems really well. Yeah, people are trying to replace Webpack, and they're trying to replace it with Webpack combat capabilities, because we're understanding, maybe we want to try and write in a new language. Maybe we want to try and find some new paradigms. But ultimately, the core idea of this really pluggable solution that allows you to build and compose your own kind of meta frameworks on top of it, of building your own plugins that all do these specific things to allow you to use your CSS solution of choice, your bundling solutions, things that work well for your use case. That's not going away, and Webpack has solved that really well. When I look at cool new solutions that I'm excited about, I'm really excited about Vite. Vite is a really powerful solution that gives us a little bit more out of the box. Sort of it's wrapping up roll-up. It's doing a little bit more work around just-in-time compilation in the developer experience, which is probably what I'd probably say is mostly missing from Webpack. Is Webpack kind of tries to need to do everything even in the dev build. So there's a lot of cool paradigms coming about, but I don't think we're going to lose that really highly pluggable, really highly customizable capabilities that really was popularized with Webpack.
I very much agree. I think people are just trying to improve on what there was. I think it's going to always have to be pluggable for power users to want to do what they need. I feel like it's slowly moving away. Yeah. Oh, I learned today that it's called Vite. I was always calling it Vite. So there we go.
The more you know. So if we were to kind of summarize, Jarrod, do you think like Webpack, yay or nay? It sounds like it's on the yay train. We like Webpack. Webpack good?
Look, I love Webpack. If I got my crystal ball out, I would say we're probably going to be moving over to wrapping Vite over Webpack soon. There's things that I find easier to do with Vite, and it's easier for us to scale up to larger user experiences, larger applications, without hurting the developer experience and that developer feedback and getting sort of pages loading quicker. So absolutely, I love Webpack. I will continue to love Webpack. We may end up moving away from it, not because we don't love Webpack, but I think we'll start loving Vite more.
Do you have any particular gripes about front ends, the way they're kind of commonly written, or do you think there's a common mistake that developers and engineers make when they write their front ends?
I have a gripe about front ends, but it's not the engineers writing the UI.
All right, hit us. What's your gripe?
My gripe is that I love so much about the JavaScript module system that I want that in CSS. For context, we have a CSS and JS solution, or we use a CSS and JS solution called Vanilla Extract that allows you to write and author your CSS in JavaScript or TypeScript, have all of that composition and type safety of TypeScript, that ability to sort of really easily migrate API changes, all of that, the power of JavaScript and TypeScript whilst authoring your CSS. It still generates out CSS files, static CSS files. So you're still creating a user experience that's sort of optimized for the user. You're just getting to author in a way that you can kind of compose it together. The effort required to recreate that module system to allow that to bundle and be shareable in NPM packages is more effort than I would want it to be. I'd love the idea that you can, that there's sort of a standardized approach for bundling CSS with your JavaScript and creating this sort of reusable components. And the reason why this is a gripe is all of those words I've just used, CSS modules and web components, it sounds like we're on the right track, but as we start looking into these technologies, they're not offering what we want as this kind of composition target where we can kind of co-locate our CSS and JavaScript, but still create just HTML and CSS at the end.
So Vanilla Extract, you said your team wrote that. So how did that initially come about?
Vanilla Extract is kind of a bit of a 2.0 on an earlier solution called Treat. Treat was originally built for replacing our existing investment in things like CSS modules, which allowed us to sort of write our CSS co-located with our JavaScript, but it wasn't type safe. Like you were importing your CSS class names, and we could kind of run some linting over there. But the idea of sort of composing together atomic styles, and there were solutions that weren't necessarily easy to type check. We wanted a solution that was type safe, and so we built Treat. Treat then was relying on using a lot of sort of features to sort of compile down. The compilation of Treat was very complicated.
Yeah, you still needed CSS files, didn't you?
Not quite, but ultimately it meant that we could only have a single CSS file as an export. And it was also just an incredibly complicated piece of code that really only one engineer understood how it worked. But then an awesome, cool thing came about. CSS variables. We updated our browser support policy to support CSS variables. For context, we usually have a very broad browser support policy because, a bit of an opinion. I feel like everyone deserves to get a job, and we don't want to be like, oh, you don't get to search for jobs because you have an old browser. So we have a very broad browser support policy.
So do we support Edge or Internet Explorer?
We don't.
Edge, yes, surely. Yeah.
So we obviously support Edge now. We don't support Internet Explorer anymore. But even then, it was quite a while. It wasn't that long ago that we sort of dropped support for some older browsers. We're slowly iterating with on our versions, but usually we're looking quite far back. I think our current browser support policy not long ago was Safari 10 point something, and it's just bumped up recently. So we support quite old browsers. So we updated our browser support policy to support CSS variables, and that allowed us to significantly simplify the solution. For context, I didn't write this. I'm not that familiar with the details, so Vanilla Extract's a little bit of a black box for me, a little bit before my time joining the team.
Is it common for React devs to have no idea that SEEK kind of does this open source stuff? Does SEEK have a very big presence in the open source community, would you say?
Ooh, a very big presence. I think it has a big presence. Certainly punches above its weight. Sort of size of company versus presence. It's not uncommon for when we're hiring, for example, to people say, "Oh yeah, no, I've been copying Braid practices for a while now." Like, oh great, so you already know Braid. So it's not uncommon for us when we're hiring, or even just going out to meetups and talking to people. We're sort of meeting people who say, "Yeah, no, I like this about your UI," or "I've been trying out Vanilla Extract," or Capsize is another one that sort of came out from our team around standardizing the height and spacing around text that people will adopt and then sort of come talk to us after the fact.
Interesting. So the decisions that SEEK are making are having an influence on the kind of broader front-end engineering. Absolutely.
And I think the awesome thing about that is it's very much a two-way street. It's a conversation. So it's really amazing that you can go out to meetups, you can talk to engineers, and they're aware of your ideas, but you can kind of get feedback. You can talk to them about the ideas that you're sort of sharing and talking about. It's one of the reasons I like talking about some of the things we do at SEEK at meetups and presenting the things we do, because there's no doubt you're going to have someone come up to you after your talk and say, "Hey, here's what I liked. Here's what we do differently. What do you think about that?" And that kind of ability to learn by sharing is something that I really enjoy as part of my role.